emotional sensitivity. There is a terrible error in understanding autism to say a lack of empathy. It's a huge insult to some of the kindest people I know as friends, colleagues, and family members. There is great caring. But I think there is a difference here that needs to be recognized, and this is being overly sensitive to another person's negative mood, infected by it. And it's almost as though somebody's in a negative mood, an equivalent level of a cold, but the person with autism gets infected by it, but they don't get a cold, they get the flu. And sometimes I'm really angry, sad, anxious. Where did this come from? What in my life has happened that will justify this emotional reaction? No, nothing's happened. You've just been with someone that is having that feeling. So it's not just simply the emotions within you, it's emotions within other people too, and especially sensitive to negative moods of disappointment, anxiety, or agitation. And that person picks it up. We call this empathic attunement. These are further quotes. There's a kind of instant subconscious reaction to the emotional states of other people, but it's been there since childhood. If someone approaches me for a conversation and they are full of worry, fear, or anger, I find myself suddenly in the same state of emotion. And this means that sometimes social withdrawal is not necessarily due to social confusion or sensory sensitivity. The withdrawal is a protection mechanism from being with toxic others with emotionality.
Between Asperger's and sixth sense. I think it's really common with women. I know other women who have it. And I first became aware of it as being part of Asperger's from Rudy Simone's book. I'll redo what she says here. It's in the section on sensory overload. She has psychic sensitivity. I believe that in some cases our senses are heightened and are almost animal-like. We sense things. I think similar to our sense of humor, we miss the obvious and see what is not obvious to others. Very true. And then she says, I believe that this is a large part of why we have difficulty getting along with others. If someone is smiling and saying one thing, but psychically we are hearing something completely different, we will get confused and want to run away. This often conflicts with appearances and what others tell me, causing me to doubt my own intuition. I usually turn out to be right. A more cynical person might call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. The misperception of this sensitivity is that we are hard to get along with. Paranoid. And then she talks about how we end up staying home a lot.
To distinguish very subtle cues that others would not see, or it might be a feeling I pick up from them. What neurotypicals do is they tend to use the visual and auditory. The visual is the facial expression and gesture. The auditory is the tone of voice. Now, in autism, you have a different sensory profile. And I think this is in a sixth sense sensitivity. And is able to pick up emotions in other people using channels that neurotypicals aren't aware of.
That's when the whole image and his perceived threat from another person, but it was perceived threat. I think there are a lot of reasons why we get stuck. Using this simple example of the guy, socially it would be inappropriate. It would have caused him all kinds of problems. So he needed to suppress that anger, and you suppress it with the muscles. This is what Wilhelm Reich talked about, armoring. So you have this unacceptable feeling, so you armor against that feeling. In this case, it was in his jaw. And actually the way it came out, he had this image actually of biting this guy. I mean, how primal can you get? So, and other reasons are, again, socially unacceptable. And the other thing is we're afraid of the energy that's locked in our bracing responses and our freeze responses. And so the very sensations that will help take us out of the freeze response back into balance, into equilibrium, into inner regulation, those sensations are frightening often to a person. And so they stop those sensations from happening, but it's the very sensations that will take them out of the freeze.
Definitely accurate. Trust your intuition there. Can be overpowering. It's a sixth sense. So you avoid some social situations due to being sensitive to negative vibes.
There is no sincere communication with a narcissist. They're never communicating sincerely. They abuse language. They abuse truth. They're not talking to you with a point like a normal human being would. Whatever it is that they're talking about is a smokescreen for their intent. Talking is not really what they do. They signal. And what they're signaling is, I'm better than you. What they're signaling is, I'm superior to you and to everybody else. What they're signaling is, you should fear losing me. So that's one thing to understand. And if somebody is communicating with you and they're not being sincere, then you shouldn't be sincere either. Abandon sincere communication when communicating with the insincere. Just let it go. It's not going to happen. You keep throwing your sincerity, your earnestness, your empathy into this sucking black hole, and it never ends. You'll never win. You'll never get to a point where you're like, yes, finally, I got my point across. I've been heard. No, because here's the second point. And I got this from a counseling psychotherapist who specializes in narcissism, and his name is Gary Klein. And he says, when communicating with the narcissist or the borderlines, remember, the point is, there is no point. The point is confusion. The point is chaos.